Welcome, brave listeners, to another frightening tale, presented by yours truly, Wilhelm. Tune in each week where I entertain my listeners with another dark tale of the paranormal, donated by authors from around the world. If you're an author of some paranormal fiction and would like to share a story with my listeners, submit one at frighteningtales.com. And while you're there, tune in for more than 30 hours of previous content. Today's tale was written by Nelson Bond, an American writer from 1930 through to 1950. Nelson penned a series of stories, ranging from science fiction to pulp and scripts for radio. Nelson was a recipient of the Nebula Authors Emeritus Award for Lifetime Achievement. He was a pioneer of early science fiction and fantasy. He's noted for introducing one of the very first powerful female characters in science fiction, Meg, and the Priestess Who Rebelled. It was published in Amazing Stories, October 1939. In 1995, Nelson was urged by fans to start writing again, and so he did. In 2006, Nelson passed while on a visit with his son due to heart complications. So today we will honor him by sharing his story, The Bookshop. In the dead sultriness of Manhattan midsummer, there was no incentive to write. Marston's apartment was like the inside of a kiln. 2 hours ago, he had stripped off his damp shirt and sat down before his typewriter. Now, for all his labors, he had nothing to show but a dozen crumpled balls of bond paper flung haphazardly in and at the wastepaper basket. "Damn novels," muttered Marston. "And damn editors with deadlines, and damn this heat." He swept a handful of white and yellow sheets from the tray before him and leafed through them bitterly. It was a good idea, his plot for this novel. He read again the 3 chapters he had completed. It was good work, some of the best he had ever done, smoothly written. The Underlings, a psychological story of defeat, and of ones who let themselves be defeated. The fault, dear Brutus, is not with our stars. A good theme, and so far a good job. But this heat, this overwhelming, enervating heat. He was, Marston realized with a sudden petulant anger, ill. Actually, and physically ill. He gave up. With a final disparaging glance at the white sheet shining in the platen roll, he rose. He was shocked to find his exhaustion so deep that he stood up there, danced before his eyes a black vertigo. Brief, but frightening. There could be only suffocation and discomfort so long as he remained here. Out of doors, it would be hot, too, but there might be a ghost of a breeze stirring in the shaded streets down by the river. Marston put on a shirt and a coat and went out. He had not remembered the bookshop was along this way. Had indeed quite forgotten the little shop until suddenly it was there, just a few paces before him. Then he recalled the several occasions on which, before, he had seen it and planned to drop in for a browse. Each time, circumstances had prevented him from doing so. The bookshop was far from prepossessing in its appearance. It was ancient and musty, and its only lure was the faint aura of mystery ever attendant to dark, neglected places. How long had it been a fixture in this neighborhood? Marston had no way of knowing. It did, apparently, but a slight business. For the scores who passed it by, none save himself so much as turned a head to peer into its dusty window. He had seen it first a year ago, or so, that afternoon when, with poor Thatcher, he had been riding by here on a bus. Thatcher was a minor poet, not a very good one, but an ardent one. He had been regaling Marston with an enthusiastic preview of his latest masterpiece, soon to be released. Very soon, Marston. Just a few more stanzas and it goes to the publisher. It's a good work, Marston. Oh, I know that sounds braggart, coming from me, but a writer can tell when his work is good or bad. This isn't like anything I've done before. It's poetry this time. Real poetry. His tone was pathetically eager. Marston murmured. I'm sure it is, Thatcher. I know it is. I'm calling it Songs of a New Century. It will make me, Marston. Up to now, I've just been a versifier. This book will give me a reputation. See if I'm not. Oh, I say. He stopped suddenly. Marston, glancing up swiftly, remembered that Thatcher's health was reportedly on the thin edge. The man didn't look at all well. His cheeks were too pale, his eyes too dark and sunken. What is it, old man? You all right? What? Thatcher recovered his poise and ventured the slimmest excuse for a smile. Yes, quite. But he pressed the buzzer that drew the bus to the curb, and then rose. Marston thought, a little abruptly, I'm fine, thanks. But I just remembered a little errand. Chap I have to see, in there. And he pointed to the shop before which Marston now stood. Marston insisted. You're sure you feel well? Perhaps I should come along. Now, don't you worry about me. I'll be all right. Chap's an old friend of mine. Thatcher climbed down from the bus. He called back over his shoulder. See you later, Marston. Watch for the songs. But he had, thought Marston regretfully, been mistaken on both counts. They never met again, nor did the new book ever appear. Poor Thatcher was not so well as he had hopefully claimed. It was his heart. The next day, Marston read his name in the obituary column. All of a year ago that had been. Since then, Marston had thought often of the little bookshop. It held a sort of macabre fascination for him, an association of ideas Marston could not explain, even to himself. Into that little shop Thatcher had disappeared. Marston had never seen him again. It made the bookshop a sort of symbol. Silly, of course, but last winter, when Marston lay ill of flu and tossed for restless hours in delirium, it had become almost an obsession for him. A compulsion clung to him. He experienced an insensate desire to climb from his sickbed and visit it. A curious urge, but one so powerful that when finally he recovered, he did make a special trip to the little shop. But he had chosen a poor time. It was closed. The door was latched and bolted and the shades drawn tight. Now, however, it was not closed. The shade was up, the door an inch or so invitingly ajar. And though the shop was small, there would be coolness in its musty depths. The sun poured down on Marston's head and pressed on his shoulders with a ponderable strength. His head ached, and a dull nausea was upon him. He opened the door and went in. The transition from glaring sunlight to shaded dark was abrupt. At first he could see nothing. Somewhere in the black of the shop a bell jangled softly. Ancient silences seemed to well in upon the cheerful tinny sound, engulfing and stilling it. Marston, stumbling forward, bumped against a table. Surprise brought a small "Oh!" to his lips, and he clung to the table, waiting for his moment of blindness to pass. Out of the shadows before him came a quiet, sympathetic voice. "Did you hurt yourself, my friend?" Marston complained. "It's dark in here." "Dark?" A moment's silence, then, "Dark? Yes, it is, I suppose. But peaceful?" Marston could see more plainly now. He stood in the corner of a small, low-ceilinged room, walled on either side with shelves of books. The table before him was also piled high with bound volumes. Some were old and faded, others, he was surprised to notice, were brightly new. Beyond the table was a tiny desk, and at the desk a quiet figure sat, imperturbably scratching, with an old goose quill and a ledger open before him. In the ill light, Marston could not clearly see the proprietor's face, but he saw bent shoulders and white hair shining like a halo in the gloom. There was, he felt, something vaguely familiar about the old man's features. Something tantalizingly near the fringes of his memory. It slipped away even as he tried to grasp it, and the proprietor looked up. "Is there anything in particular, my friend?" "Just looking," said Marston. Like all book lovers, he loathed deficiency in the management of a bookstore. He preferred seeking, in his own good time and at his own whim, whatever of literary interest the shop might hold for him. The old man nodded. "There is no need for haste," he said, and returned to his interminable scribbling, the goose quill pen scraping dryly but not unpleasantly. Marston turned to the shelves. It did not occur to him at once that there was anything unusual about the books on which he looked. That realization came upon him gradually. Hence it came as a slow, growing wonder, and not with any deep, sharp sense of shock. There are so many books, so many authors. Their names are legion, easily forgotten. Marston's eyes had traveled over perhaps a full row before there awakened in his mind the awareness that he had viewed something strange and puzzling, something that did not ring quite true. He glanced back along the row. The proprietor apparently had made no effort to separate his stock according to subject matter. Poetry, plays, and novels, essays and novels, essays and texts stood side by side in scrambled heterogeneity. Titles heretofore unknown by Marston, new names and old thoughts and new. Then he saw a thin volume, brown with age. The title, Agamemnon, by Shakespeare. By Shakespeare? Marston knew of no such title. The heart spark, ever latent in the heart of the book worshipper, leapt suddenly into blaze. One of two things. He had stumbled across either the most amazing discovery of the century, of the greatest hoax ever perpetrated in the name of art. His pulse quickened with excitement. Marston reached for the volume, and then his hand, in reaching, stayed. For now he saw, senses sharpened by his discovery, still other titles, books equally unknown and equally amazing. King Arthur of Britain by John Milton. Cap and Catfish by Mark Twain. John Galsworthy, Feet of Clay, and Darkling Moors by Charlotte Bronte. Swiftly his gaze dropped to another shelf. He saw, with a vast, incredulous incomprehension, Christopher Crump by Charles Dickens, The Gargoyle's Eye by Edgar Allan Poe, Thackeray's Colonel Capperthwaite, and The Private Casebook of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He had heard no footsteps, but now he was aware that at his side stood the proprietor of the little shop. There was quiet pleasure in the old man's voice. "You admire my books, young friend." Marston could only wave a hand at the shelves. His speech was stammering, confused. "But these, I don't understand." "You are Robert Marston, aren't you? Fantasy is your field. You should appreciate these others." Marston's gaze helplessly followed the proprietor's gesture. He looked upon the names well known to him as his own, but at titles never before dreamed of. The Troglodytes by Jules Verne, Charles Fort's What Unseen Presence, Hanuman, The First God by Ignatius Donnelly, Weinbaum's Spaceman, and Lovecraft's bulky complete history of demonology. And under these, a smaller volume, a thin, bright volume with untarnished book jacket, its title, Songs of a New Century. Its author, David Thatcher. It was then, suddenly, that Marston understood. A great dull prescience filled him, and to his host he said in a voice that was strangely tired, "I suppose, then it too is here?" And the old man nodded gravely. "The underlings. Yes, my son. It too is here." There was but one copy, fresh and shining new, as if it had at this very moment come from the publisher's office. The dust jacket was brave and fair, even in this shaken hour. Marston's heart knew a swift, high lift of pride in this, his book. He reached for it, then hesitated, and of his aged host he asked, "May I?" "It is your book," said the old man, and Marston took it down. "Oh, some changes have been made," he found, "in opening chapters, but they were minor editings. In the main, those scenes were as he had written them. With shaken hands he turned the clean white pages. His eyes sought avidly words that heretofore had never known the permanence of print, read thoughts that up till now had existed only in his mind. And swiftly though he read, he knew with fierce, bright joy that he had not erred in claiming this his finest work. There was no mediocrity in this book, no faltering, no stumbling confusion of ideas. Each sentence was perfect. No word or thought or phrase but shone with lustrous purity. This was the book Marston had always, somewhere deep within him. Here was the triumphant accomplishment of his writing powers, and Marston, who knew books, knew that his book was great, and that in it, at the end, his skill had attained its full fruition. At the end, he closed the book, and its closing was a small and startling sound in the fusty silence. He stared at his host, knowing now wherein the face and form had been familiar. A coldness was upon him, and a sudden fear, and he said loudly, "But no, not now, old man, not before it's finished." The old man said quietly, "Surely, you see, it cannot be finished over there, Marston. Nothing is ever perfect on that side. Only in this bookshop are stories and songs high and sweet and true as their authors dreamed them. There the underlings would be but another book, a cloth-bound, crippled symbol of a dream that died a-borning. Thoughts as lofty as the stars faltering on words too weak to bear them. Tales finished over there are never truly great. Always they lack the wings on which their authors envisioned them. Only in the library of the left undone may a story reach the heights intended by its creator. Here, beside an epic Homer ever meant to write, a play that Marlowe planned but did not put to words, Galsworthy's last and greatest romance, 10,000 tales unwritten by 1,000 dreamers. Here, the underlings can take its rightful place in the imperishable library of might have been. It is the final price for perfection, and a small one." His voice soughed into silence like the last faint whisper of the moon-drawn tide, and it seemed to Marston that a new sound reached his ears. It was as though voices spoke to him from some not distant place, voices greeting him in good fellowship, bidding him come and join their camaraderie. He heard, or thought he did, the laughing voice of Thatcher. "What's all the fuss, old boy? My soul, but you're making an issue of a simple matter." Now the old man held out his hand to Marston. "Are you ready, my friend?" he asked. But there was the book in his hand, and suddenly there swept into Marston's brain a thought so daring that an ague seized his limbs. It was not yet too late, nor would it be until that ancient hand met his. Could he but reach the street outside, and with this book, the underlings might yet be given to the world in all its dreamed perfection. A swift decision stirred him. With a sudden cry, he stepped back from the ancient's proffered clasp, whirled and stumbled towards the doorway. The worn knob slipped beneath his palm, the door held, and in panic desperation, he tugged, panting at the barrier. Behind him, the soft choices rose in a wailing crescendo of dismay. A sigh whispered in his ear. "There's no escape, my son. You but delay." Then the door was open, and the sunlight, raw, hot, and heavy as the crush of a monstrous fist, was blinding gold in his eyes. With the precious volume clenched in his hands, he cried aloud his triumph, staggered into the street wildly, heedlessly. He did not hear the voices raised in swift warning, nor the startling rasp of the klaxon, nor the screaming grind of futile brakes. He heard only the deafening tumult of a world flaming into oblivion. Then the soft peace once more, and the chiding voice of Ancient One. "You but delay, my son. You are ready now?" And a cool hand meeting his own. "Couldn't help hitting him," said the truckman. "I swear to God, I couldn't help it. This guy, seen it? He'll tell you. He came busting right out in front of me, shouting like he's crazy or something. I tried to stop, but..." "Okay," said the big man in blue. "Okay, it wasn't your fault. Anybody else see what happened? Where'd he come from, anyhow?" A witness, white of lip, lifted horror-fascinated eyes from the figure on the asphalt. He pointed a shaking finger. "Over there, officer. That vacant lot across the street. I saw him wandering around in there, mumbling to himself. I think he must have had a sunstroke the way he acted. That property has been vacant for years. Why'd he want to go in there?" "I'll take your name," said the policeman. "Anybody recognize him? Let's see that book he was carrying. Maybe it's got his name in it." Someone handed him the book. He leafed through the volume briefly, tilted back his cap, and scratched his forehead. "Hey, now, this is the queerest looking damn book I ever saw. Look, only the first 3 chapters printed. And the rest of it, nothing but blank pages." Thank you, brave listeners, for joining me on another dark story. This week's tale was The Bookshop, written by Nelson Bond. I urge my listeners to go out and find more content by our weekly authors. If you're not too timid, you can find more writing by Nelson at your local bookstore. Fans of Frightening Tales can show their support by collecting merchandise available at frighteningtales.com. If today's story entertained you, please click the thumbs up like button.
And if you'd like to hear more stories, then click the subscribe button and tune in each week. Tune in for another frightening tale, if you're brave enough.